Am I the only one who started and stopped this game about 10 times? It's weird because I was so hyped for this game when the devs were showing off their previews, and me being a fan of the Souls-like genre in general, the Lords of the Fallen reboot was looking like it was about to fill a void that was missing from me for quite some time actually. Fast forward to October 2023, and the game releases to an above average critical reception, sitting at a solid 75 on Metacritic, and that's completely respectable. But what caught my attention the most was how mixed the actual player base was about the game. I mean, looking at it to date, it only sits at a 67 with the user rating. Outside of the technical issues, which were of course present both on console and PC, like every game these days, the consensus felt like the game made a solid attempt, but fell short in a number of ways, specifically to its weightless and floaty combat, and honestly, just generally confusing level design, which to me is still prevalent to this day. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, I still ended up buying the game because, hey, I wanted to play a Souls-like, and I was convinced that those issues probably wouldn't really apply to me. I'd probably just look past them. Well, they applied, and they applied harder than I even had anticipated. I genuinely started and stopped Lords of the Fallen no less than 10 times, and each time I would return when a new update was dropped, and honestly, to the devs' credit, they stuck with it and pushed out a constant stream of updates. Each update made me boot the game up, go to the character creator, and start up a new game because I had no clue where I left off. But each time I did restart my new character, I would end up quickly dropping the game, and I just couldn't figure out why. The dark fantasy vibes of this game are immaculate, and dark fantasy in general is a genre that I'm highly interested in. Mix that with the fact that this game is a Souls-like, then it should just be a match made in heaven, right? Well, I started to dig into what was the cause of the problem. Every time I restarted the game, I would quickly lose my interest due to the combat just feeling unsatisfying. There was something about the sound design along with the weapons actually connecting with an enemy that felt so flat. To add to that, the level design after defeating the first boss would be nothing short of confusing as mentioned above, and the combination of those two turned me off the game every time without fail. Thankfully, the developers of Lords of the Fallen pushed their most recent patch that has elevated the game to a standard that it was lacking before. This patch addresses so much of what my initial criticisms were, and this time around, I actually stuck around. So this video is essentially going to serve somewhat as an updated review, so let's get into it. As we know, Lords of the Fallen is a reboot of the game that came out in 2014, and the game has a number of ingredients that make up the Souls-like recipe. The number of changes that the developers have put out since the game's release is nothing short of impressive. It honestly shows that the developers and the studio really believe in the idea. I think all the changes to combat are very welcome. The reworked sound effects, the more impactful hits make a huge difference in creating an experience that's actually engaging and not like you're hitting an enemy with a pillow. This version of Lords of the Fallen is the best version of the game, without a doubt. It just feels so much smoother. The reworked movement system also helps quite a bit, allowing you to make more precise movements and stop on a dime when needed. This may sound like a small change, but in a game where there are a ton of floating platforms that can lead to your death, having that precise movement is absolutely crucial. To add to that, the dedicated jump button is something that I felt like the game needed from the get-go. I mean, coming from Elden Ring, jumping almost became second nature in these types of games. And sure, that may be unfair to a game like the Lords of the Fallen to have been expected to have a jump button from the start, but it does end up adding a great dynamic to movement and traversal in general. The addition here is executed very well. Going through these short platforming areas is much smoother now that I can just press X instead of a combination of running and then pressing another button. That being said, the dedicated jump button does add some inconveniences, like accidentally jumping off a platform when trying to get down a ladder, but those instances happen to me very rarely. Now, since this video is sort of a re-review, then I'll just share my thoughts on some other mechanics as well. What the Lords of the Fallen does differently that sets itself apart from other titles in the genre is the dynamic map that can change with a button press. The Umbral Realm is essentially the land of the dead and opens up areas and pathways that aren't available otherwise. I have to say that even in the 2.0 release, with all the improvements that have been made to the realm shift mechanic, I just can't get into the idea of having to constantly change realms to traverse these areas. There have been other games that have attempted this two maps at once sort of thing, and it's something that is just very very hard to execute in general. I will say that the level design and overall planning of this likely took the developers a really long time. Carving out paths and puzzles in one world and seeing the effects in others. I think the intentions are good, but what this whole realm shift mechanic ends up doing is creating unneeded complexity that the first time players might just bounce off of and not come back to. See, my first experience with the game was that the controls were overly complex, and remembering the button combinations to do one action or another was something that added unneeded complexity to a genre of games that already has you on your toes pretty much at all times. Now, the developers have since mitigated some of these issues since launch by adding contextual button press cues and information on what button to press depending on which action you want to take with your lamp. Yes, this does help a bit, but honestly, it still doesn't change my opinion on the whole lamp and roll mechanics being a layer of complexity that wasn't really needed. I think where it stands now is completely fine, and I'm interested in seeing what the developers do in the sequel. Personally, I'd be happy if they got rid of the lamp mechanics, but I'd understand if they didn't because the lore relies on it quite heavily. Now, I want to quickly touch on some other things before wrapping this video up. The boss designs in this game are quite nice. I think we can all agree that there is some good originality here and thoughtfulness put into the boss designs. That being said, I found most bosses to be pretty easy. I'm not sure if you guys would agree with me on this, but most bosses I took them down within 2 or 3 attempts. I only mention that because these games are generally known for their hard boss mechanics that put you on the brink of breaking your controller basically, but in Lords of the Fallen, that really wasn't the case. I'm just going to make a quick reference point here. I recently finished Black Myth Wukong for the sake of comparison, and some of those bosses just took me upwards of 20 attempts, even more. Honestly, this isn't a good or a bad thing, but just something I want to communicate as far as the difference in difficulty goes. Another thing is the general level design. I talked about this before. I think I'm not the only one who thinks that traversing the areas and knowing where to go next is just confusing at times. I've seen this complaint many times, and obviously the 2.0 update can't really just redesign whole areas in the game. This is more so something that they can improve on in the sequel, just creating more cleaner and intuitive levels. There were more than a few times while playing this game that I had to just put my controller down and look up a walkthrough to get from area to area because I was just going in circles for so long. Of course, build variety in this game is quite nice. There's a good variety of weapons to choose from, and being able to two-hand or one-hand your weapon does help in creating some variety in your moveset. You of course have other ranged options like using magic or bows. It's essentially your standard Souls-like affair, but the latest 2.0 update really brings the overall combat system up to par with some of the better Souls-like titles out there. Having full and complete control of your player may sound like common sense, but when the game first released, there was this strange floatiness tied to your player and the controls in general. It's hard to explain, but when you stop pressing up, your character would move for another half second or so. That has been completely addressed, and it makes a massive difference as far as responsiveness goes. And in a game where every frame matters, especially in intense boss fights, that sense of control is nothing short of crucial. Honestly, Lords of the Fallen is an impressive package. It's come a long way from when it first launched and has had so many updates that it's essentially a new game now. My favorite addition was the advanced game modifiers, which allow you to play the game how you want, and not just how you want, but also in creative ways. There are options such as setting randomized loot and randomized enemies, and the reason I bring attention to those specifically is because a large part of the Souls-like community likes doing randomizer runs in games such as Elden Ring and the Dark Souls series. But with Lords of the Fallen having these options built into it without needing any mods, even on console, is just really cool. There is even an Iron Man mode where if you die in Umbral, your progress is completely reset. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. Anyway, I want to wrap this video up as I didn't even want it to go on this long. The Lords of the Fallen is now the complete package with years of updates behind it and its most recent 2.0 patch that brought the game up to a new standard. There is little to no reason not to play this game if you're interested in the Souls-like genre. I've already said in my opening, but every time I would go back to this game after an update, I would quickly bounce off because things just never felt right, and the 2.0 update has been that one thing that has finally kept me from jumping off again. The seamless co-op is also a really nice touch and has been redone so that both you and your partner's progress are tied to one another. Also, there's even this Friends Pass, which if your friend doesn't own the game, they can still play with you. That in itself is just awesome. When the game first came out, I honestly would have a hard time recommending it, but where it stands today, after all the updates, it would be hard for me not to recommend the Lords of the Fallen. That's going to wrap up this video. Thank you guys for watching as always. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button. If you're new here, subscribe. I'll see you all in the next one.